What was the first time, if ever, that you noticed this is not going to be sustainable?
I never noticed that. He was adored by the congregation. They were crazy about him. I don't think I'm exaggerating. I think so many people in that shul felt he was coming home. This is where he grew up.
Yeah.
And look.
Yeah.
And he has always been a people person.
Sure.
Which is the
I
single
just met him.
most...
I already feel like we're friends.
It's the single most important thing in the rabbinate, to be a people
Sure.
person and to love people and to want to be with people. And he hit the ground running, and he was very good at everything.
So if I were to have asked you, if I were to take a time machine to 1998, pull you aside and say, how do you think your son Josh is? Do you think this is going to be long term? Do you think he's going to be the next senior rabbi of KJ? What would your response have been?
Absolutely. Oh gosh, I felt he could really handle it. Has to grow, obviously, and get experience and so on. But he was fabulous, and in my perception, which turned out to be wrong, he loved it and was loved by the congregation.
Sure.
I think I was right about being loved by the congregation.
Sure.
But
His
as
love for it.
As far as his love for it, that was a little more open to question, and I absolutely did not anticipate that.
So
Because when I started, I loved what I was doing. I used to fight with my father sometimes on things.
What would you
how
fight
to
with
do.
your father? But do you remember specifics?
My father loved decorum, order, kavod, beis hakneses, the glory of the shul, a lot of the formality. Not that he didn't have spiritual.
Yeah, I wouldn't paint you as a hippie exactly.
No. But I was interested in informal stuff. I was interested in cooling a little bit.
Gotcha.
The place.
Gotcha.
And we used to argue about that. And generally, my father, after arguing furiously,
Sure.
would say, "All right, go try it out." And then and if it worked out, he was always very gracious and said, "You know what? Kol hakavod, good." But he would be fighting, and it continued for my 23 years.
But it never caused a serious rift.
No rift. No,
You
no
have
rift.
debates, so
Yeah. I mean, I had to work around him sometimes and so on. We didn't. In his years in KJ, I never felt that at all. And I tried not to do what my father was doing with me and insist on a certain way to do it. There's a KJ way to do it. What you're thinking about is not KJ. To the best of my knowledge, I did not do it, and I also tried not to overwhelm him with a lot of work because I wanted him to love what he was doing.
Yeah. Started to build up. So I'm curious for you. You started before the high holidays in '98. When did you first have that thought in the back of your head? And I'm trying to remember, in my own life, beginning something and realizing I'm not going to stick with it. This is not. I need an out. I think I felt it even during smicha. There was a time that I wanted to be a pulpit rabbi. And I think that during smicha, some fight or flight kicked in and was like, this is not for you. You're not going to be a pulpit rabbi. And then there were years where I was lost. I'm curious, you had a successful year in Connecticut. You just came home, so to speak. When did it first dawn on you, this is not sustainable?
Early. I probably at the end of my first year.
Year one. You made it through a full year.
I think I made it through a full year. I don't exactly remember, but I think I made it through a full year, and really was questioning if I could maintain it.
Because what was so either depleting or difficult? Meaning, you had a good year in Stanford.
Yeah.
What changed your vigor for Jewish education that at the end of that year, this tiny voice starts getting louder and louder and saying, this is not going to be a long-term path?
So I think it was a few things. I think number one, I was 28. I guess at the end of my first year, I was 29, and I was single, and I was working 24/7. Really 24/7. And I sort of consider even just having to put on a suit Sunday morning to go to Minyan.
I always say I didn't become a pulpit rabbi, so I don't have to wear suits on Sunday.
Right. So, like
that was the deal breaker for me.
And that didn't even count,
Yeah.
all the funerals and the weddings and the bar mitzvahs and the bat mitzvahs.
Sure.
But it was really 24/7. And of course, Shabbos, when everybody else was winding down, I was winding up.
Sure.
And I just felt very much like I didn't have a life, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And dating was very hard. And
It's hard, not just I was single when I entered into the Jewish educational sphere. To just blame it, though, it's on the logistical factor of you're so busy. It's more than that.
Yeah.
It's hard being single, especially in the pulpit. It's hard being single in being an educator. I struggle with that. It was even, I'm sure you had a workaround, like having a tallis. I didn't have a tallis because we waited until we got married, and like you would feel. I always felt like a bacher in shul. I didn't feel like a grown up.
Yeah. Yes. So I think number one, I just felt like I was very overwhelmed, in as much as my father really was trying very hard to make it as easy as possible.
And you noticed him doing that.
Yeah, I knew what I had heard the stories about how sort of how often difficult it was with my grandfather, and I was conscious. I was conscious that, of course, he was trying to make it easier for me. He wanted me to do this. And so at that point, clearly he wanted me to do this. And so he was going to do as much as he could to help me like it. It still didn't make it not overwhelming. And I think also I was doing a lot of teaching. And so I was working in KJ and in Ramaz. And I was doing a lot of teaching. And I am not a huge Talmud Chacham, and preparing was very hard for me. Mm-hmm. And so I just felt like I was, it was even just hard for me. A bunch of things that were hard for me, but one of the things that was hard for me was like there was no such thing as a night where I did not have to have several hours preparing for the next day. So I was very overwhelmed, but equally as important, or maybe more important, I did not feel like it was my authentic self.
Tell me about that. What do you mean by that? Because everything you've said would have applied equally in Stanford or in any pulpit. There was something about coming home, maybe a weight or something. What is it about your authentic self that you felt?
Look, I'll answer, but I do want to say it was a lot more than Stanford. And I think part of the lot more than Stanford was because of the expectation of the the model that my father had set and that my grandfather Alav Shalom had set. Right? There was, we at one point in all of this, sort of there was this like idea. Okay, maybe Josh can stay. Maybe he'll give him Tuesday off. He's going to be off on Tuesdays. And I think my father looked at the person who said that and said, that's not a thing.
You don't get off on Tuesdays.
That's not a thing. You don't get off on Tuesdays.
In the pulpit.
Right. And I think to a certain extent that was, in Stanford, they had a wonderful tradition of the rabbinate, but I didn't know that tradition of the rabbinate. So I wasn't comparing myself to Rabbi Aaron Kranz, Alav Shalom. Mm-hmm. I was just 26 years old and doing what I needed to do.
Charting your own path.
Right. Whereas here, there's a certain expectation of what a rabbi did, and that was so it was more work than, or I was working harder, let's say, and emotionally harder. In terms of being my authentic self, I don't know. I never considered myself. It's hard to say as I went through smicha and I've been teaching. I never considered myself a religious role model for people. And it was very hard for me to keep giving speeches and teaching and doing all these things about going to Minyan, and I dreaded Minyan. I was like, and
No, I know what that is.
and
I know what that is. I heard once from Moshe Bain, and he was actually referring to KJ. Moshe Bain was the former president of the OU. He always says, I always wanted to be a pulpit rabbi. The only pulpit I ever wanted was KJ. He said that many times. And he told me this. And when he told to me, it was like a knife in my heart because it resonated so much. He said, I could be a rabbi and I could command respect, but I would never be the kind of rabbi that I would respect, because you know a little bit about yourself. And that a little piece of that still haunts me. I mean, I didn't go into the pulpit, so I don't feel like the example, that pulpit rabbi example still weighs in the same way, but I know what that means. We're like, this doesn't come naturally to me, and I'm playing a role rather than exuding my natural self to the world.
Yeah. So that was me.
So let's move on past the whispers and let's just talk. Do you have a memory of the first time that Josh came to you and had what I would call the capital T, capital C, the conversation, where he came to you and essentially said, this is not working for me? Like that must be like, you're looking through your eyes and you're saying, wow, it's all coming together. The rabbi taking assistant, just like I did, just like my father. Like, this is a wow moment. And at some point, the veil comes down. Josh approaches you and says this, and I know we're trying to avoid the D word, but this dynasty, from an outsider, would look at it. I know you don't like that term, but to an outsider, is not going to be continuing in this very natural trajectory that we're set up for.